Hello students, welcome to section 49 of White Sargasso Sea. This section will deal with the analysis of the novel. Section 1 is narrated by Antoinette. Part 1 of the White Sargasso Sea focuses on her childhood at Colibri Estate after the death of her father, Alexander Cosway. Antoinette's vague and fragmentary memories focus on glimpses of tropical landscape, descriptions of her mother, and examples of her childhood isolation. Racial tensions and the disapproval of the white Jamaican ladies pervade these memories. Danger lurks in all these scenes. In fact, the novel begins with the explicit warning: when trouble comes, close ranks, it says. Rees sets a tone of eerie silence in this West Indian landscape, the calm before the storm of racial violence. In a state of despair and decay, the Colibri estate represents the downfall of the colonial empire and the aftermath of its exploitative reign in the West Indies. The bizarre tale about Mr. Luttrell speaks to the mood of apprehension among the island's whites, who fear the revenge of the black ex-slaves. Antoinette, as the narrator, seems particularly preoccupied with morbidity and decay. The text is replete with images of death and rotting, such as flies that hover over the carcass of Annette's poisoned horse. Religious symbols and imagery also dominate the novel's opening passages. Godfrey constantly speaks about a Lord who makes no distinction between blacks and whites. Remembering the garden, Antoinette compares it to the Garden of Eden in the Bible. Like Eden, Antoinette's garden is a symbol of corrupted innocence. It has given itself over to wilderness and a savage overgrowth that marks the entire estate. It is in this atmosphere of impurity and decay that Antoinette and her mother become increasingly isolated and misanthropic. Antoinette and her mother are complete outsiders in a community, not unlike Christophine. Like Christophine, Annette is a foreigner in Jamaica, having lived in Martinique. She wears the French Caribbean fashions that other Jamaican women avoid. Antoinette feels as estranged as her mother when others call her a white cockroach, and when Tia, her friend, accuses her and her family of not being like real white people. Accepted by neither white nor black society, Antoinette feels great shame. Now, this is also a symbol that goes ahead in the novel and shows what happens to Antoinette. She is neither accepted by her family, nor her mother, nor her husband, or the readers of Jane Eyre, where she has her birth. Section 2 talks about the persecution and refuge figure prominently in this section. Most notably, when Antoinette describes being followed by a young black girl who sings, "Go away, white cockroach, go away." Insulting refrains such as this one become lodged in Antoinette's mind and resurface in her adult life. She becomes paranoid about being followed, watched, and tracked, a fear that haunts her forest dream. Feeling prosecuted, she seeks refuge from the cruel world of human beings by surrounding herself in nature's fold, curling up against the velvety moss wall of the family's garden and trying to disappear. Antoinette is fascinated with nature and is very attuned to its presence. As her elaborate descriptions suggest, nature is a central character in the story, and perhaps her only friend she ever finds in the story. Tia's betrayal of Antoinette when they bet pennies emphasizes the importance of money and currency in the novel's central relationships. The pennies serve as a symbol of capitalism, though ironically they are gifts from Christophine, a figure seemingly far removed from such capitalism. The fact that Tia envies Antoinette's pennies and even betrays her friend to obtain them reveals Tia's acceptance of white ideals and the capitalist system. Money symbolizes the altered, even degraded, values of the island people, and it accounts for the kind of corrupted innocence that Antoinette recognizes in the family garden. As white people do not have money, Antoinette and her mother can no longer command the respect of the black community, in which gold purchases allegiance. When Antoinette and Tia exchange clothing, their roles are symbolically reversed. Without money, Antoinette is no longer entitled to the nicer clothing of a white Creole girl, and it feels shame when she looks at her shabby daughter, because Antoinette represents, in that moment, the extent to which the Causeway family has fallen in social rank. According to Christophine, the new white families who move into Mr. Luttrell's old estate bring trouble to their lives. These families further upset a tenuous social balance by highlighting the difference between prosperous English whites and poor, powerless white Creoles. Antoinette's forest dream and the heavy footsteps that she bears behind her respect the approach of new English colonials who have become to the island and known to make their wealth and to reap the rewards from the old slave owners' misfortunes. While her mother begins to re emerge herself in this proprietary society, Antoinette spends less and less time at Colibri, feeling unsettled and apprehensive about the new arrivals. This section somehow tries to foresee the new arrival that is going to be her decimation in the form of Rochester. Section 3. The wedding scene is one of the many instances of overhearing and overseeing in the novel. By quoting bits of overheard conversation, Antoinette allows us to see her and her mother as others see them. The women at the wedding condemn the family as strange, talking of a 6-foot snake they saw at the house, a symbol of the evil that resides at Colibri. This section also introduces us to Mr. Mason's prejudices about the blacks of the West Indies, as well as his miscomprehension of the Creole position. In the somewhat upturned Caribbean world, the servants are in control, while Creole whites like Causeways live in fear. Mr. Mason, however, misjudges the ex-slaves as harmless and childlike, and he is supremely confident that, as a white Englishman, he is safe from all harm. He cannot understand how his wife feels subject to the very people she is meant to control. Antoinette and her mother, by contrast, have a very instinctive awareness of the rising animosity amongst the servants. They sense rage and danger all around, as Antoinette feels that the sky and sea were on fire, an ominous description that foreshadows the burning of the house. Indeed, on the night of the fire, Antoinette has an unsettling premonition of evil. Superstitious and greatly influenced by Christophine's lore, Antoinette yearns for her protective stick and thinks of her nurse's warning that the glacis was not a good place when night was coming. Such superstitions reveal Antoinette's integration into her black Caribbean surroundings. Raised by Christophine, Antoinette shares the older woman's obvious sensibilities, and as a child, she sees everything around her as living. This world view contrasts sharply with the rational, logical, and scientific thinking of a man like Mr. Mason, who does not believe that the servants are a threat thinking of a man like Mr. Mason until they run him out of the house on the night of the fire. The episode with Annette's parrot, Coco, symbolizes and mimics the life of Annette and her daughter. The bird symbolizes the bound captivity of both the mother and the daughter. The figurative clipping of their feathers by the insensitive English husbands who see them as threatening free spirits, which in equality happens to be Antoinette and Annette herself. Coco's fall from the burning glasses prefigures Antoinette's fall from the battlements of Rochester's English home. Furthermore, the question of identity arises when Antoinette runs from the house and sees her reflection in Tia's face. Just as parallels are made between the mother figures, Annette and Christophine, so are Antoinette and Tia paired as close friends, even to the extent of being considered as sisters. Annette and Antoinette, seeking to define themselves, often look at their respective counterparts as reflections. When Tia throws the rock at Antoinette, she shatters the reflected image. This act metaphorically represents Antoinette's movement away from her black childhood and her eventual emergence into the white Creole world of the Spanish town. The next happens to be section 4, where the sudden opening of the narrative 6 weeks after the night of the fire suggests that Antoinette has been in a timeless, empty delirium. The narrative becomes increasingly fragmented as the story progresses, suggesting Antoinette's inability to follow an orderly, linear, Western notion of timekeeping. Time seems to pass more organically for Antoinette. Raised by the ageless naturalist Christophine, Antoinette is attuned to the seasons with little grasp on concrete realities of time and place. Rather, Antoinette's consciousness travels freely and openly from one associative thought to the next, integrating sense and sounds. Aunt Cora's care of Antoinette is a rare instance of family nurturing, and one of the few times Antoinette receives maternal care from anyone other than her nurse, Christophine. This maternal care ends, however, when Aunt Cora sends Antoinette away to school. Seemingly rejected on all sides, Antoinette enters the convent reluctantly, but finds within its cold, thick walls a refuge from the harsh world outside. When Antoinette enters the convent crying, a nun washes her face, an act symbolizing ritual purification. In this world of women, the forces of patriarchy and racial hatred cannot harm Antoinette. Numbed by the routineness of her safe Christian environment, she retreats into herself and forgets her past, rarely thinking of her mother or Colibri. Antoinette appears to have found her ultimate peace in her family of mothers and nuns at the convent. Just as Antoinette is settling into this lifestyle, the world of male negotiation disturbs her peace. Mr. Mason attempts to cajole his stepdaughter with gifts of clothing and jewelry, using money to manipulate her into his marriage scheme. He sees Antoinette primarily as an opportunity to do business with other white gentlemen. This, mind you, as we have recollected and recalled in the previous session, the treating of a human being as subhuman. Here, that is taken a step further, and here a human being is considered to be an object which can be traded. She is always considered to be an object of moving away from one person to the other. Mr. Mason, who happens to be the stepfather, who is in turn supposed to take care of his stepdaughter, does not do so. Instead, He sees to it that his responsibility is taken over by someone else, wherein he is free of the responsibility, and the so called burden of having a girl to raise is passed on to another. And mind you, this is not something which the writer acknowledges. She says, always attuned to impending evil that surrounds her, Antoinette has the forest dream again. Now, mind you, the forest dream recurs again and again in the whole plot of the novel, although this time it is more elaborate, as if to suggest that the danger is more imminent. Here, by the end of this particular part, the first part, we come to know that there is something drastic going to happen with our protagonist Antoinette. Thank you.